Okay, greetings. My name is Colin McLean, and it is my honor to welcome you to Imagined Lunar Communities, Habitation, Hope, and Humanity, hosted by the New School of Policy and Design for Outer Space in partnership with Manish Melwani, who serves as one of our panelists today, and our partner organization at the New School, the Afro-Indigenous Future Series. This is our last event under the aegis of the 2021 Venice Biennale in the City X Virtual Pavilion. Special thanks to Ed Keller for inviting us into this collaboration. I'm so excited to have you here today to close this series. With that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Jose Luna.
Thank you, Colin. Yes, on behalf of NSP2 and the Afro-Indigenous Future Series working group, I'd like to thank everyone here for making this event possible and for your works, for your art, for your ideas. As a due ritualistic procedure, I'd like to make a land acknowledgement to the Lenape land where NSP2 is based, and to the mountain or earth being in which I'm sitting right now, called Pichincha. Additionally, because this is a highly internationalized event, I'd like to acknowledge this whole earth, who has many names, including Gaia, Aditi, Umay, Olofin, Nerthus, Coatlicue, and Pachamama, and so many more. We belong to the earth, which is the life source, and as it was mentioned in another NSP2 event last week, there's a need to understand our origins, our cosmogony, in order to build any kind of foresight. And with this on the table, thank you so much for the panel, to the panelists. Thank you for your foresight that you're bringing in today. Now, Colin, back to you.
Thank you for that, Jose. I think we can jump straight into the event from here, but first, a final sad note that one of our panelists, Grace Dillon, could not join us today after some unavoidable personal matters of hers. She sends her blessings to all. I just wanted to pass that on. Introducing today's moderator, Smaran Dayal is a PhD candidate in comparative literature at NYU and a public humanities fellow at the Museum of the City of New York. He is writing a dissertation on the Afrofuturist fiction of Octavia Butler and Samuel Delany. Smaran, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Colin. It's such a pleasure to be here and to be surrounded by such brilliant writers, and your organizers as well, Colin and Jose. Thank you so much. I want to also jump straight in and introduce the first of our three writers who are joining us today. And okay, so I'm just going to read out her bio. Malka Older is a writer and sociologist, the author of Infomocracy and its sequels, The Collection and Other Disasters, and numerous serial episodes, stories, and essays. She's a faculty associate at Arizona State University School for the Future of Innovation and Society, where she teaches on humanitarian work and predictive fictions. And in case you haven't seen her book before, this is Infomocracy. Please go ahead and buy it, check it out. It's a fantastic novel, and I'll pass it over to her.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and thank you for showing my book. If you do judge books by the cover, there's a fantastic cover by Will Stale that I really appreciate because it conveys the book and also gets people to buy it, which is amazing. Thank you so much for having me here. It's really a pleasure to join in this event. It was such a wonderful generative prompt that you gave for us all. And you're ready for me to do the reading now? All right, so we'll start in with this story of Lunar Light. Full Earth days were holidays, and so were New Earth days. Sandika said that this was because New Earth days were full moon days, which were Poya days and always holidays even on Earth. But Kat said that wasn't why. It was something they made up for Mare Nectaris because holidays are important. When Ofe asked Mommy, she took a deep breath to explain and then just said they were both right. Either way, Ofe and Ana's favorite time was when it was night for them and also night for Abuela and Abuelo's house, and Abuelo and Abuela's house was in the part of Earth they could see, and it was the window when Guts, which was really Gutfsse, but Ana couldn't pronounce that and Guts was more fun to say anyway, lined up the satellite repeater mirrors and magnifiers for them. This happened once a month. Ana didn't understand how long months were, so she asked all the time if it was time yet. And Ofe got pretty good at explaining all those pieces to her, including that the window wasn't really a window, but a time. She's getting better at lunar orbital mechanics than I am, Ofe heard Mommy say about her on a call with Abuela while she and Ana put on their outside suits. Well, that's good, isn't it? Educational. It is good. I just hope, you know, that they're not missing too much from home while they're here. It's a short time you're there. I know, Ana isn't even going to remember this. Still, she'll have something to tell about, and they're having fun. They're going outside now, Mama. Remember to look in 7 minutes. Ofe sealed up her outside suit, and she and Ana grabbed the shapes that they had been building after school, or after day play in Ana's case, since she was too young for real school, since the last month. The first month they were there, when Mommy suggested they make something to show Abuela and Abuelo during their window, they hadn't really known what to do. At least Ofe hadn't, not until Mommy suggested she make a heart. Then she had a lot of fun picking the exact shade between pink and red to put in the tubes. Her first heart didn't look right, so Mommy helped her make a good one. Meanwhile, Ana just scribbled something and everyone said how beautiful it was. Now every month, Ofe thought and thought and thought and came up with something really cool. This time it was a smiley face but with 3 eyes and a funny hairdo. The object was light but awkward to carry out inside the station, but once they got out through the airlock, it was really light and not that hard to manage. Mommy drove them in the rover far enough from the lights of the station, and then they got out and held them up. The call to Abuela was patched into their suit earphones, so they knew as soon as the window opened, because they could hear her oohing and eyeing. Beautiful, Abuela said. Lovely, such smart children. And Ana and Ofe bounced there on the dust of the moon, shaking the shapes they had made in the direction of the dark crescent of the earth.
Thank you so much. That was so wonderful. It was wonderful to read it the first time on paper, but thank you so much for wonderful, wonderful reading. I'm going to move on to our second writer now. Manish Melwani is a Singaporean writer of strange and monstrous fictions that skulk the borderlands of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. His work explores history, migration, empire, and what agency looks like when you've been shaped by these vast, often hostile structures. So Manish, take it away.
Thank you so much, Smaran. It is an honor to be here. Can everyone hear me okay? Cool, all right. So this is an excerpt from a fictional book titled Culinary Orbits, A Long Durée History of Human Food by Achempong, Sen, Suwaranarat, and others. The culinary traditions of the outer solar system, that is to say, the ingredients, techniques, and recipes favored in the Jovian and Saturnian moons' long-term research habitats, clearly trace their origins back to the communal kitchens and horticulture pods of Mare Nectaris. Not least of all, because many of the personnel who set up those distant science stations had spent time on the famed lunar habitat. The successes of Mare Nectaris, along with the horrific failures of the so-called Martian venture, that final desperate attempt by a group of multinational corporations to escape dissolution by colonizing Mars, taught us many things. Most crucial were the following. 1, In close quarters, surrounded by a literally uninhabitable environment, communal cooperation is far more effective than exploitative hierarchy. 2, to survive in any environment, you must respect that environment and not, as was done on Earth, tamper with it to the point of collapse. 3, human community is as crucial as any life support system. And 4, culinary tradition is integral to human community. To quote a survivor of the failed Martian venture, nutrient goop does not feed the soul. To put all this another way, space habitation is an intrinsically high pressure situation. So sometimes what's needed to ease the pressure is a literal pressure cooker. Space biryani, or on the preeminence of hybridized limited cookware meals in space habitat environments. Centuries ago, biryani, which is a mixed rice dish of astonishing variety, made its way across the Indian subcontinent and the entire Indian Ocean trade world, reaching East Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and maritime Southeast Asia. An extended discussion of biryani's original provenance and its relationship to similarly widespread and variegated mixed rice dishes such as pulao from Central Asia and jollof from West Africa can be found in chapter 6, along with some recipes. Biryani and pulao and jollof and others come in a proliferation of forms with a level of regional hybridization that renders its exact origin trajectory essentially unplottable. The cuisine of the moon-based Mare Nectaris and the far-flung habitats of Callisto, Europa, Ganymede, Titan, Enceladus, and Stormeye Station in Jupiter are similar. A quick survey of communal cookbooks reveals a delicious intermingling of influences and flavors. Biryani, pulao, jollof, but also paella, jambalaya, mixed wild rice, claypot rice, bibimbap, curries, stews, and more. Many of these dishes went through multiple adaptation periods, stripped down when ingredients were limited during transit or a habitat's early days, then beefed up again, sometimes literally, when horticulture and cell culture facilities became available. Even then, though, a clear preference for a one-pot technique persists, as do the results of experiments of necessity, curried hominy, 3-grain gumbo laya, masala lentil fried rice, and many more. We also see a distinct preference for spicy food. This might seem surprising given the occasional unpredictability of the human digestive system in space, but first-hand accounts make the reason for this abundantly clear. Craving heat, spice prevalence in extraplanetary cuisine. When Europa's Fimbul habitat, that famed research station beneath the ice crust, built to search for life in that moon's ancient and icy ocean, was first established, the first crops to take root in its horticulture pods weren't dietary staples like rice and maize. Instead, chili plants and peppercorns were planted to enthusiastic applause. In their memoirs, founding lab parent Charis Venkatesh wrote, "We'd spent 4 long years in a vacuum-sealed craft, cooking meals from vacuum-sealed ingredient bags. Maybe it was the cold void. Maybe it was because we knew we were going to an ice moon. But we found ourselves craving heat. After 48 months of transit and powdered spice, we knew exactly what we wanted to plant in the lab on Europa. Chili plants, peppercorns, cinnamon, cardamom, cloves, saffron. I dreamt of fresh spices sizzling in oil." Indeed, communal cookbooks from Fimbul Habitat's kitchen reveal a loving embrace of a whole range of spice dishes, from harissas to salsas to curries and mala seasonings. Humans on Europa are also notable for being the first to incorporate xenonutrients into their cooking, an edible plankton harvested from the sublunar European Sea, typically fried and sprinkled atop biryani or jollof, or used in curries, soups, and spicy seafood stews. Thank you. And I would also like to acknowledge my friend and fellow writer Nivedita Sen for her role in the initial genesis of the idea of space biryani. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Manish. Your descriptions have me salivating, but we'll come back to, I want to live in space. I want to try these ingredients, but we'll come back to it in a moment. I'm going to move on to our third and final author today, who like the fourth, who couldn't make it today, like Grace Dillon, is also an anthologist, also a compiler of science fiction. So I'm just gonna show you his books after I read out his bio. So Fabio Fernandez is a Brazilian writer and translator based in Italy, author of novels, plays, and of the collection Love and Archaeology. He is associate professor at the Pontificia Universidade Católica de Sao Paulo, where he teaches and researches science fiction literature with a focus on utopias. And so here are two of his anthologies, Solarpunk and We See a Different Frontier. And I'm excited to dig into both of them. So Fabio, take it away.
Well, thank you, Smaran. I would like to thank your new school, Colin, Jose, Nick, everyone here for the invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. When I first read the prompt, I felt that it was just such a challenge, and I love this kind of prompts because they keep my blood flowing, and I also want to write so many things. But I had to content myself with writing this small piece. It's called the Ahimsa Protocol. It's written in the form of a manifesto. So I'll start with the mission statement. All life is worth living. All life is fragile. If this is true on Earth, it's more so here on the moon, an environment where, for the first time in humankind's history, we must care every day for our surroundings, including the air we breathe, by constant maintenance. For that reason, we, the Ahimsa Collective, propose a protocol composed of 8 rules that we call the Eightfold Path of Ahimsa. Who are we? We call ourselves the Ahimsa Collective, a group of individuals of diverse social strata, ethnicities, religious and non-religious, who decided to join forces to bring change to the lunar society, suggesting alternatives for a better living as a true community with focus on non-violent behavior. What is Ahimsa? Ahimsa is a Sanskrit word that can be translated as non-violence. This is the cornerstone of our protocol, which is basically to be read as a set of suggested propositions instead of steadfast rules, with the basic goal of avoiding all kinds of violence, physical, mental, emotional. The Eightfold Path of Ahimsa. 1. All life is sacred. Life begets life. Every living being is part of a system bigger than itself. If we want that system to thrive and to be friendly to life, we must be friendly to it as well. We cannot do that while condoning violence or turning a blind eye to it. 2. Nothing lasts forever. Everything is impermanent. Conditions change. We must recognize that in order to accept things as they come and work with them and not to remain attached to past conditions. 3. We are not alone. We should help each other to carry the weight. When conditions change, we must prepare for a lack of balance while at the same time addressing this imbalance. Remember, you do not live in a void, even though we might be surrounded by the lack of air outside. But you are not alone. We can do whatever we set our minds to it, as long as we can count with each other. 4. De-weaponize your mind. Violence is cultural. It is not innate to human beings, nor it is woven into our DNA. We can choose not to be or act violent. That said, empathy and compassion are also cultural and can be learned. We can choose to learn empathy. 5. Mudita, not Schadenfreude. Do not feel happy for your fellow humans' misadventures. Instead, feel happy for their small victories. Pronoia is the opposite of paranoia. When you start to feel happy for others, you can allow yourself to be happy as well. 6. tools, not weapons. No weapons of any sort shall be allowed. Weapons are not made to defend oneself from violence. Weapons invite violence. We can do without weapons. We have the necessary technology and the ability to self-control. 7. Maintenance requires patience. All of these require a constant care. For you to care properly about your tools, you must have patience. We come from a capitalist world where no due attention is given to time. The moon is not the earth. We must strive to create a different culture. You don't repair a bulkhead or an air management system in a hurry. To do things properly on the moon is to court death. We court life. 8. Ahimsa is not submission. And finally, living by non-violence doesn't mean that one should welcome violent acts without reacting to them. Ahimsa doesn't entail submission. See the examples of Gandhi and Thich Nhat Hanh, who fought injustice without resorting to violence. We still fight the good fight. Life is worth it. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Fabio. Maybe we could take a moment just to let all of that sink in and turn to a discussion. So what we had planned was for Malka, Manish, and Fabio to go back and forth and talk about how these very different scenarios of lunar living and lunar ethics and life on space can come together, and whether they overlap, what they share in common. So maybe I'll start us off with one sentence, which or one thought, which is that all three of these pieces seem to share a certain sense of taking community, taking cuisine, a sense of sustainability and multiculturalism into space, onto the moon. And they come at it in very different ways, but maybe using that sort of that thought, that sense of overlap, I can open it up to y'all. And just so that I get us moving right away into the discussion, I'm gonna maybe call on Manish to start us off. How do you think your piece connects to Fabio's and Malka's, and where do you see the overlaps?
Thank you for that, Smaran. Yeah, as I was listening to all three pieces, the word that came to mind as a unifying theme was care. And it's really about how do we bring a sense of care with us, whether it's care in what we're doing, care for other humans, or care for the environments that we are putting ourselves into. And I guess how my piece relates to Fabio's and Malka's, I really sensed just, I think that so much of the traditional literature in English language science fiction around going to space is about subjugating space. It's about occupying space as a colonizing force, settling space. There's all this manifest destiny stuff in there. And I was very interested in just what it would mean to be a good guest in space. And I feel like all our pieces kind of spoke to that in very different ways.
I would like to take from him. Yes, I agree entirely, and that's the thing. Years ago, I read an anthology edited, I think it was by Groff Conklin, called Invaders from Earth. And then it set my mind, oh, yes, that is the thing. We are invading. We are always thinking of colonizing. And I'm really okay, I enjoyed several of these stories while I was growing up, but not so much today. I like the idea of caring. I like the idea of nurturing. Okay, yeah, we will move. We will have a diaspora, for instance. I have a whole set of stories and space opera setting I'm building about a new diaspora. And but here's the thing: people are expanding, but not necessarily invading. And of course, when you are expanding, you tend to trespass on others. But then you start to take care of what you're doing, to be mindful of what you are doing. And that's what I think that Manish and Malka's pieces interact with mine, because we're thinking of this. I think it's a family connection. Malka, it's straight. It's very, very straight to the point. Manish too, because of the food. I'm also salivating. I wasn't hungry until you started reading this. Now it's 8:30 p.m. here in Rome, and I'm already starving. I haven't my dinner yet. But mine, even though it's not exactly family, the Ahimsa Collective, it was taught by me as a kind of family. Because we also have to rethink family. You especially many today, the 21st century, we are still suffering so much prejudices. And I have many friends. I have gay and lesbian friends, trans friends, who had who are finding new families for their affinities, not necessarily united to your mom and dad. And but you can be too. And that's interesting. I always liked stories that treated the space with respect, not only outer space, but space we are living in. I really like King Stanley Robinson's stories, because I think he, in a way, as a white man from the United States, he started in that environment this discussion. There are others who came before him, like Chad Oliver, but Chad Oliver, nobody reads him anymore today. And to be frank, now maybe it's our time to write this kind of stories. And I'm very happy to be part of this today, because I really love their stories, and I think it has more room to grow.
Yeah, I agree with all of this. Of course, it's been very well said. I'm also hungry now for biryani. And I also, I think that there are so many stories about space and exploration, actually exploration of various kinds, that are all about being sterile and being limited and bare and pared down to the minimum. And they're about endurance and, the leader who can do this and doesn't care because no emotions. And I think we're at a point where hopefully we can see that this is silly and that we need more than that. We want more than that. And there's really no reason not to really support and offer this kind of caring that we are talking about in terms of, how we build and keep communities in an expanded world, in an expanded society that does cross some of these boundaries. And one of the things in my story that was really, there were sort of two real nods to this. One was saying that holidays are important, right? Because it's so easy to be like, oh no, we're going to work nonstop because this is important work and we are on a moon base, and but holidays are important, and not just for rest, but also for community. And then the other was that this group that has sent them to this place for work is offering this window of aligning the satellites for this reason that is technically unnecessary, but really, really necessary, really, really important to these kids and this family and the grandparents. And that it's, it's not something that is very difficult or costly for this organization, but there are so many, I think today we see so many examples where that would not happen regardless. It's just not something that comes up. And so making that extra effort of saying, we are going to do things that allow, and this was all, you know, it was very much generated by the prompt and the world building that we were given. So I think, you know, we're all reacting to this really wonderful setup and scenario that asks, how can we think about this sort of space exploration and settlement as really living space and family space? And so that's what I was responding to.
Maybe I could pick up some aspects of each of your pieces that touches on what you just brought up, Malka, which is all three of your visions of the moon, of space, are specifically not this individualist, masculinist ideal that we see in so much of the history of specifically American science fiction or even British science fiction. You know, who has to confront a sterile environment and has to endure. So whether you're thinking of, you know, even The Martian or any number of movies. In fact, I'm thinking of the Martians in The Expanse and how they're different from the Belters, who, while they might be oppressed, still kind of make time for pleasure. And of course, there's like a class allegorization happening, or race allegorization happening. But going to your pieces, I loved in the Ahimsa Protocols, in Fabio's Ahimsa Protocols, he writes one of the in one of the points, remember, you do not live in a void, even though we might be surrounded by the lack of air outside, right? You might be in the vacuum of space, but it doesn't have to be a cultural void. It doesn't have to be a void in which community doesn't exist, a void in which connection doesn't exist, a void in which ethics doesn't exist, you know, and you sort of resort to either some kind of state of nature or some kind of imagined individualism. Instead, even as Manish's you know, piece shows, cuisine is so important to thriving in space. I mean, one of his characters, one of the, I forget the person who founds the lab, was it Venkesh? What was his name, Manish? Sorry to.
Yeah, their name is Charis Venkatesh.
Charis Venkatesh says, right, nutrient goop does not feed the soul. And I mean, we can't just survive in space as bodies, but we're also taking our souls and everything else with us into space. So in Manish's piece, we see that the first sort of plants, the first crops that they plant on Europa is not wheat, are not staples, but spices to counteract the cold of space, to counteract the cold, the frozen surface of Europa, right? So we've got warmth there. We've got, you know, Fabio pointing out that space is it might be a vacuum, but it's not a void. And then I also love another point from Fabio's piece where you say the moon is not the earth, and it's almost it's almost like an epigraph or like a little saying on its own, you know, straight out of a Confucius for space. The moon is not the earth. Yes, that's obvious that the moon is not the earth, but what does that actually mean? So you go on and you say, we must strive to create a different culture. You don't repair a bulkhead or an air management system in a hurry, right? The moon is not the earth. And then coming back to your piece, Malka, I just think I mean, and you talked about this also, so maybe I don't want to elaborate too much, but even in this high-tech setting where you have this family posted at this research station on the moon, right? And they're, you know, and they've got all the communication technologies. They can literally have their grandparents, you know, wired into their spacesuits, but it's a different thing for them to physically, in a way, in an analog way, see their parents. And what it brought to mind, so they have to wait for both the Earth and the moon's night times to align, right? And then they use these reflectors to sort of make an image of their physical selves on the moon possible for their grandparents. And they're holding up this very analog, very physical heart or the other object, that her sibling makes in order for their grandparents to see it. And it's a very different thing for their grandparents to see, their little, their grandchildren hopping up and down on the dust of moon. And for me, it brought to mind sort of ideas of migration, but how different it is to say, even if this is for a short time, but how different it might be just in this, for a moment of speculation, to migrate to the moon versus migrating to another part of the earth, right? So I can't wait for the moon to come up and then see my family in India up on the moon. But there's something really magical if you're on another, body in space, and for these two objects to align, and for you to be able to literally physically look up and say, that's my abuela and that's my abuelo. There's something really magical about that, but it also ties back to the other two pieces in that there's something really precious about, kinds of community, and as Fabio said, family, that we want to take with us into space. We don't want to be, Isaac Asimov, but so what is the science fiction that we have to write? I'd love to hear from y'all. What is the science fiction that Fabio is imploring us to write?
I would like to pick up exactly what you asked, because I was thinking all about this. You mentioned The Expanse. I really loving the series. I haven't had the time to read the books yet, but I have almost them all here with me. But I must confess, I didn't like much the storyline of Marco Inaros, because he's the typical Latin American revolutionary who is evil and he's crazy. And I really I can't condone this, because it's too easy. It's too easy. All the rest of the story is really, really good. And I really want you to read the books, but this kind of make me, oh, okay. Because here's the thing I've been thinking about is, usually science fiction stories written by white men, not all of them, okay, we know, but most of them are written, and they write fantasies. They project their fantasies, even good evil things, but because there will be a few good men and women that will fight the good fight, and will fight this evil. But you know what I like about postmodern narratives? Postmodern narratives aren't about space opera in the old sense of the word. It is about small narratives, family narratives. And what I'm trying to do, I love space operas, but we can put the small narratives into the big picture. And here's we managed to do just that. Picking up a family, picking up a story of how can you instead of cultivating meat, why should we? It's a hell of a job. It's not worth it. And then add spices. Oh, it's awesome. I'm already thinking of doing some stir fry, some tempura with plankton. It will be awesome to eat this. And here's the thing. I think that while usually Anglo-white men project their fantasies, we project I mean people from other parts of the world, we usually project our realities. We don't project as much our fantasies. We project our, to say, my abuela, my abuelo, my family, my friends, my foods, my okay, I want you to be mindful, to be peaceful, but I don't want to do this in a stereotyped way. I really to address one step at a time, talking with people, talking with my friends, speaking, what do you want? What do I want? How can we do this one step at a time? And I think this kind of narrative we are building here addresses just that need, because this is a real need. And I love this. I think it's fun to imagine that and to write that.
Malka, not to put you on the spot, but I saw you nodding earlier, and I wonder if it's just sort of agreement or if you had something to add.
No, I do agree. I mean, I love an adventure story as much as the next person, but so many of these stories have really been, they leave out so much. You know, I have a short story in my collection about space marine midwives. It's called The Survival of the Species, because yeah, giving birth is actually necessary for the survival of the species. And yet we rarely see anything in stories about space of how we're going to manage things like giving birth and raising children. And it's such a telling absence, I think, that goes with this whole idea of, you know, the space race as this competition, and that astronauts must fit into certain narrow parameters physically and also psychologically and mentally, and somehow we know what those are. And you know, I think there's just so much of that that was really built into the way that the technology and the industry developed, and then found its way into sci-fi and was self-reinforcing across these two. So it's you know, it's really important that we expand that to be thinking from these different perspectives about families and thinking about, you know, food. And it's not all going to be the NASA ice cream. It's not Dippin' Dots. We need, you know, people are going to want to do things that give them pleasure, like cook good food and grow spices. And I think, you know, there's that also, that, you know, that one of the other things that's really interesting about stories that involve space is this tension between, and it's something that is also really important in this world, as all of these things are, but the tension between, you know, going someplace new and exploring and discovering and changing while keeping some identity, right? These are stories that maybe are not, there's the invasion part, and there's the immigration part, there's the movement part, there's the this, you know, this balance of assimilation and holding tight to where we come from. And so, you know, I really appreciate actually both of the other panelists work for that, because, you know, for the food story, obviously, like this idea of like, we're going to go someplace totally different. Maybe someday we'll figure out how to cultivate something entirely new and eat something different, and that'll be great. But we're also going to hold on to these things that we love, that we've been dreaming about for the whole journey, because that's an important part of who we are. And also, you know, I think Fabio's piece is very much about, you know, we have this philosophy, but we are adapting it to reflect this new kind of environment that we're in. And it is all the starker how important it is because of this environment that we are observing, that we are learning from, but we're also keeping this philosophy that comes from something ancient, from where we came from. So all of those elements, I think, are really, they're so interesting to delve into, and to use this idea of space settlement and space travel to also reflect the dynamics that happen here.
I'm gonna, thank you so much, Malka. I'm gonna jump in with some stray thoughts that I've been writing down while the two of you have been speaking. So I was thinking a lot about the British boarding school, which is like famously and stereotypically like a savage way to be a teenager, right? And like thinking about how, you know, there's like a direct through line from, you know, the sort of colonial era adventure fantasies to golden age science fiction. And so in a very real way, like the people who built the British Empire are the products of these British boarding schools. And like that is actually like the ideology of like space colonization as a default. And it's like, why would we send that into the galaxy? Like why would we want that to be humanity's contribution to the solar system instead of networks of care and support and mutual aid? Malka, when something your piece really reminded me of was the way that, you know, sometimes when I see the moon at night, it's like normal. It's like something I'm used to seeing. When I see the moon in the daytime, it reminds me that I'm on a planet and that the moon is the satellite of the Earth. And it gives me maybe the opposite, or like a similar thing to the overview effect that astronauts talk about, where I'm like, oh, this planet is precious. It is a biosphere, and like it's a body in space, and it's got another body in space orbiting it, and we really need to like take care of that. And something that I think I was really struck by is like, how does being, or something I want to put to the two of you is, how does living in space, living on this moon base for a time, perhaps being a young child growing up there, how does that change you? What do you bring back from that experience when you return to Earth? Like, for example, Fabio, in a lot of your, as you were reading, so many of your phrases jumped out to me as just like, I could imagine them as like aphorisms that, you know, would really stick with a character, that a character would like say to someone else, like, weapons invite violence, de-weaponize your mind, you know? And Malka, I was thinking about these kids coming back to Earth, having had their early years profoundly shaped by being on the moon. So I would love to think about like what, you know, what we bring back from an experience like that, how that changes the way we interact with being on our home planet.
I would love to write another story featuring the people who wrote the manifesto eating your grown foods and talking about this, about all of this stuff. I think this is what's interesting right now. That's as Malka said about immigration, because I just did that. I'm an immigrant here. I'm a very privileged one. It's a very different position from an illegal immigrant or from some refugee. But even so, I have now a different perspective on what is to be really living for good outside your home country. And this is why one of the reasons I still love postmodern small narratives. Not because of the breaking the fourth wall thing. No, just because you have the focus on the small. And this is the thing. The immigrant is not really concerned, at least not in the first moment, with the space colonization. He's asking himself what I'm going to eat today or tomorrow, what my family is going to eat. How can I? And then you are in a whole different area, whole different country. The moon is a country in that for that matter. And how do I behave here? And if you are poor, how can I do not to be arrested? Am I going to be arrested because of the color of my skin? Because of what country on earth I'm coming from? These are very, very interesting questions. You are talking and I'm starting to think about them as we speak. And there's no answer to it, but we can start drafting the answers here in the stories.
We can start drafting the answers. I love that. I'm just going to very quickly interject to add one thing to what Manish brought up earlier, which was the continuities between sort of British imperialism or European colonialism and early science fiction. So there's, for those of you who are interested, there's at least 3 scholars I can think of who've worked on this. One of them is Jessica Langer. She wrote this book and a few others, Postcolonialism and Science Fiction, but also one of John Reeder's books. So R-I-E-D-E-R, he's a big science fiction scholar. He's written about science fiction and empire. And a third person whose name I hope I don't mispronounce is Istvan Cicere-Rone, who teaches at DePaul University. All 3 of these people have thought about, and written research the connections between imperialism and science fiction. But maybe as a provocation to build on what you were just saying, Fabio, it is, I would like us maybe to have some other science fiction texts that you might see yourselves as affiliated to, because we've been talking sort of as a foil, as a contrast to, Anglo-American white science fiction of the 20th century. What are some texts that you might feel affiliated to? And I have 3 suggestions here. So specifically, since we're focused on lunar communities and the moon, the first text that came to me when I was talking about this event early on with Manish and Colin was of course Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed, where you have the anarchist society on the moon of Anaris, which is kind of a break off from this Cold War kind of world of Urus, which is Earth, right? Or like an allegory of Earth. So that's one text. Another one I want to throw out there just as a suggestion is Octavia Butler's short story Bloodchild. It's a kind of space, because you contrasted I think expansion to colonization, Fabio, but it's a kind of tale of humanity going to an exoplanet that's already inhabited by other creatures, the Tlik, and humans end up having to form compromises in order to live in a kind of symbiotic fashion with these other creatures, but they're not in the power position, right? They're not the dominating force. Some people even read that story as an allegory of slavery. She pushes back against it, but there's definitely a kind of compromised, negotiated position for humans in space. And then the third kind of text that I want us to think about is, I think for many of us, and please correct me or like expand this if you have other ideas, but I think one of the texts of mainstream science fiction that a lot of like science fiction authors of color, scholars have found inspiring is Star Trek: The Next Generation, right? Because of the way in which it introduced so many firsts, right? Whether it was Black characters on screen, or their sort of veganism, or their sort of queer aspects to their to the show. But what is the organizing ethical principle in the show? The prime directive, right? And so I'm just going to read out the prime directive here, just to have it as one model that's not the main Anglo-American model of science fiction. So the prime directive reads: the prime directive prohibits Starfleet personnel and spacecraft from interfering in the normal development of any society, and mandates that any Starfleet vessel or crew member is expendable to prevent violation of this rule, right? So it's not no man left behind. It's we will leave the men behind if they mess with other societies. As the right of each sentient species to live in accordance with its normal cultural evolution is considered sacred, no Starfleet personnel may interfere with the normal and healthy development of alien life and culture. Such interference includes introducing superior knowledge, strength, or technology to a world whose society is incapable of handling such advantages wisely. Starfleet personnel may not violate this prime directive, even to save their lives and or their ship, unless they are acting to right an earlier violation or an accidental contamination of said culture. The directive takes precedence over any and all considerations and carries with it the highest moral obligation. So of course, this has been criticized and can be criticized as a kind of anthropological perspective, a kind of cultural relativism, an imperialism in a different form. But I just want to put it up there next to Le Guin and Butler as, texts that we might not be fully in opposition to, right? But yeah, I think jump in.
Yeah, so first of all, this is great context and perspective to have. And I think there's also a lot of really interesting authors working now who are doing things with families in space, with different approaches to space. I'm thinking of Aliette de Bodard, who has, really wonderful lived in sort of space stations with family connections in all sorts of different ways. And I'm thinking of Valerie Valdez, who has a wonderful space opera that has so much family in it, both found and blood family, and is also very funny. And many others, and Arkady Martin, who does a really interesting look at imperialism and colonialism, and sort of flips a lot of the things around in her, so far at least, duology, starting with A Memory Called Empire. So shout outs. I do want to critique the prime directive. I think it is a wonderful narrative conceit, and it's a really great way of like restraining the superpowers that these people have, but it's completely unrealistic as a principle. And just the number of times they use the word normal is already enough to make me like, and I think it sort of, I think it is mainly, and it is a great narrative conceit, and you do want to have something there that says we must get these people into situations where they can't use their superior technology, and then have this moral quandary and so on, and that's great as storytelling. But I think there's also, an idea there of being able to interact without interacting, or interact without influencing, that is very hierarchical, and that also prioritizes a kind of neutrality that's really impossible. And I think, thinking more about intentional interaction is really more fruitful. And then I want to go back for a minute to what Manish was saying as well, in terms of the story wrote, and the children who are on the moon, and what that means to them when they come back. And just to say that, in the story, I think it's very clear that the mom is constantly worried about this question of like, what is my choice to come here doing to my kids? And that Guts has also put some thought into it, because we see that there's there's daycare, and there's a school that has lots of kids that are interacting and talking to each other about these things. And so, they've set up a way for families, for parents to move there and feel like this is, an environment my kids can reasonably grow and learn in. But you see also that the mom is kind of like, on the one hand, am I taking them away from too much? But on the other hand, what are they going to bring back? If they don't even remember this, how are they going to value this experience, and what do they have from it? And I'm not answering that question in the story, but I do think that that sense of like distance and connection with the grandparents is one of the things, and I think, yeah, I mean, for me, I always put a lot of value on a difference as itself, difference per se, like the fact that they're living in a place where they have to put on outside suits and where they can bounce around and hold up things that don't weigh anything because they're outside, and just having that idea that not everything is, because when you're kids, everything seems normal. And so, for them being on the moon at that moment, even as they see these different things, it's normal. It's not something they're amazed about. But when the abuela says that the younger one will have something to tell about, even if she doesn't remember it, she's still going to go around saying, "Oh, I used to live on the moon," because that's what kids do. So it feels normal to them. But then, at some point, they're going to have, at some level, they're going to have that later realization of, oh, things can be different. And I think that's so fundamental to or at least to my project as a speculative fiction writer, to say that things can be different, and that therefore the way we live is a choice, and we can make different choices.
I agree entirely with Malka regarding the Prime Directive. I love Trek. I love all things Star Trek, but I really can't wrap my head around the Prime Directive, because they are always breaking the Prime Directive. I think during the tenure of Picard and the Enterprise, okay, he really tried hard not to break the Prime Directive. But here's the thing: I'm right now I'm loving much more Lower Decks than Discovery. I'm watching both of them. I'm not going to watch the Discovery right now because I don't have it here in Italy right now. But let me say, I love Lower Decks because they are discussing this every episode, almost every episode they discuss, why shouldn't we talk with these people? Okay, they fuck up all the time, but really they are trying to do the right thing. But in Discovery, this doesn't happen. They created a whole range of situations in which the Discovery is pretty much forced to break the directive, because in the 31st century right now, there is no Prime Directive practically, there is no federation. But the new captain, I'm sorry, I blanked the name of the character. She ever since the first story, she's not. I don't think she's a very well written character, because she was supposed to be half Vulcan because she was raised by Vulcans for 15 years, and then she proceeds to put it out in the trash, and I will cry. I'm showing that I'm weak, that I have weakness. Michael Burnham, thank you, Smaran. And okay, she has weakness, and she's awesome. She's an awesome fighter, but that shouldn't be the point of the story. And all the time, the third season, I really I was very angry sometimes, because sometimes she shouldn't do some things, but I want to because I know what's best. No, you don't. And then there's no family for her. In the end, the whole thing, oh, now she's going to be a captain, and they all hug. Oh, now we are a big family. No, they are not to her. I love all the other characters. the non-binary characters, the trans characters, they're awesome. And I think they are a family, but she is not a part of the family. And okay, I'm sorry about this, but I get really angry at this because, okay, we are trying to be revolutionary, but not in this particular point. No, they are not being this. And I would like to propose another story, another reading, another book called A Woman of the Iron People by Eleanor Arnason. And that's an awesome reading because it features exactly this. A situation in a small ship approaches a planet, an inhabited planet with a population of people who resemble feline-like humanoids. They have a whole very interesting agricultural society, and they spent it was published originally in 2 books. So the first book, the first half of the novel, it's focused on their getting there, spending much of this part not interacting, and they slowly decide to do a soft interaction. In the second half, we discover there are other people in other ships maybe going there to colonize, but they started to discuss among themselves, no, maybe it's not good for us to disrupt their civilization. And they really start to discuss how they should get elsewhere. And that was lovely, because even though if the final result is not exactly what we wished for, they really have honest discussion about this. This is not an invasion fleet. This is almost an immigration fleet, and most of the officers aboard the first ship are anthropologists. That's an important thing to say.
I want to introduce another actor that we have to confront when we're trying to think about space differently, because Malka said a few minutes ago, quote, "The way we live is a choice and we can choose to live differently," which echoes, one of the Ahimsa principles that Fabio introduced, which was, we must strive to create a different culture. So I think all 3 of you and other authors are doing that. You're creating a different speculative culture, a different imaginings of what space could be like. And here to introduce another foil, I want to talk about the space barons. And so, whether it's Richard Branson, Elon Musk, or our very own, not our very own, but someone we pushed out of Queens, New York, Bezos, right, of Amazon, they're putting forward capitalist, possessive, colonialist visions of space that are privatized, that are corporatized, that are organized in conjunction with states, in not egalitarian ways, in not community-based ways, in not sustainable ways. And so I want you all to think about what it would mean, what it means for you to be creating these alternative visions of space, to be following through your writing in choosing to live differently, choosing to imagine what living differently could look like. So if you want to talk about this, about how the importance of what you're doing, and I don't mean this in a sort of aggrandizing way, but humanity is headed into space, right? These launches keep happening, and we are increasingly through a kind of in a privatized way, not even through the Cold War, where the different states were in a space race against each other, but now in a privatized way, we are going into space. So what you're doing is actually really important, and I want you all to think about that. How do you see this contrast between you and the space barons? Malka, Manish, and Fabio versus the space barons.
I think they're lacking in imagination. And what they're doing also, it's very tied into their individual ego, which is sad for them. So, yeah. Pobrecitos come mierdas.
I love to hate on the space barons. but I think as we Smaran, we were discussing yesterday, like in a sense, they are, they're dominating the cultural narrative around space, right? Like people who don't even read science fiction have a sci-fi perspective that is basically the marketing spin from people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. So I feel like the work we are doing is in a sense a kind of imaginative guerrilla warfare that's kind of trying to like seed different ideas about how this like a version of space habitation that like is worth doing, whether or not that actually exists, whether or not that's even possible, I think is an important question to be asking. And I feel like, yeah, as science fiction, speculative fiction writers, we have a real unique responsibility because these fools have like taken ideas from our field, like books they read when they were kids, these white boys reading like classic like John W. Campbell shit and like getting really hype about it, and now they're powerful enough to like make it happen. So I feel like as a field, we have a responsibility to like critically interrogate, like, why are we still clinging on to these outdated 1950s futures? What are futures we can imagine now that willingly respond to the needs of the present moment, the fact that we are like, facing climate apocalypse? Like, the solution is not to go terraform Mars. In fact, I would say that it's actually pretty unethical to terraform any planet. The solution is to really take seriously the fact that this planet we're on is a gift, right? And like anything we do in space should perhaps be like with the lens of how can we learn more how to be good guests on good inhabitants of our homeworld, and actually try to imagine like a future worth living in on this planet. I could go on, but I feel like I will begin rambling, so I will leave it there for now.
I think you were talking about space barons. We were talking about Anglo-white men in the 50s writing stories, and I think that, hear me out, Julian Fellows, but in space. You have Edwardian narratives, Victorian narratives. We're talking about children, how we seldom see children or people giving birth. And so, yes, but there was the old Victorian dictum, children should be seen, not be heard. And mostly white men use it to like to do the stories. The children are only there in order to advance the plot. Oh, I need to teach this child a lesson. Or the woman is there to, oh, I'll have sex with her, or is to be raped. And this is the huge problem we are facing today. And I think the more stories we can talk about, the merrier. I was talking to Julian Fellows. I really enjoy Downton Abbey, but this is not realistic for the standards of that time. I think it's a good fantasy, good power fantasy, but also it's not much empowering. It gives, okay, you should be happy and contented in your place because all good things will happen to those who wait. That's the sort of thing.
I also want to just add, if I can switch hats for a second, and they're not actually different hats. It's more like maybe I'll turn my hat a little bit so that the sociology side is a bit more in front than the fiction side. But I work on the sociology of disasters. And one of the things that I find is that governments tend to not want to talk about the possibility of disaster very much. And they don't want to admit that there's a possibility of government failure in these cases, or that there's something beyond their control. And I think there's something of this narrative as well, this narrative of like propaganda and advertising in these ideas about space conquest, that it's going to be all fine. And, even if there's disasters, there'll be sort of big heroic ones and then they're done. And so there isn't these thinkings about the things like being separated from people, or, never being able to eat your favorite food again, or some of the other things that thinking of. It's just presenting this idea of, yeah, we're going to go and everything's going to be great and we can manage it and we understand. And you know, when the truth is we really do not understand the dynamics, which doesn't mean necessarily that we shouldn't do it, but that we need to approach it with a kind of humility and a recognition that there are going to be difficulties that are beyond, you know, a spaceship explosion, as terrible as that is, but that also have to do with human interaction and human pain and human desires and the way people behave and choose to behave in different situations, and that there will be joys along those lines as well, because they don't talk about that either. You know, it's very much this sort of, I mean, we've talked about the sort of manifest destiny aspect of it, but also this just very like success oriented, this very glossy, you know, product that you pay for, and then it's yours and you will enjoy the possession of it because that's what it's for, possessing. And so I think, you know, this lack of maturity and nuance is really problematic in imagining the ways that these things can proceed.
That is, yeah, that is really spot on in so many ways, and like such wonderful food for thought. I find myself thinking of a couple of novels, which are actually like novels from the 70s. So one is Samuel R. Delaney's Stars in My Pocket, like Grains of Sand, which is his like big galaxy-spanning space opera where like his intent was like to depict a level of societal complexity that a galactic civilization would have, because he was like, well, you know, even in a country, like you go from city to city, neighborhood to neighborhood, there's so many different cultures. So a galaxy would be like unfathomable. And it's actually like a very small, intimate story, even though it's like, it's space opera. It's about two lovers basically, and the unfolding of their relationship. And something that is like super, I think, interesting and prescient about it is in the background and like the big cosmic level background of the story, the major political struggle that's happening is between a conservative force known as like the family, which prioritizes the traditional nuclear heterosexual family, and something called like the SIGIN, which is sort of a more found family communal child rearing type of situation. So I find it very interesting that like that in this far future is the sort of conservative progressive struggle. Another book that I'm thinking of that I really wish the Space Barons had read, but I think they would not be able to read it, is Joanna Russ's We Who Are About To, which I think came out in like 1975. And it's basically, so Joanna Russ, feminist science fiction writer and theorist, wrote an essay very famously called The Image of Women in Science Fiction, in which she's like, there are very few women in science fiction, it's all just the image of women. And this book is about, it's like a short novella that so thoroughly critiques and destroys the concept of like space colonization, where it's about a space colonization mission crash lands on a planet that isn't quite right, but the people are so like into their mission that they're like, yeah, we're gonna set up like our breeding program, we're gonna make this work. And the narrator is like, fuck you all, this is bullshit, I hate all of you, I just want to go to a cave and like live out my days in peace and die. And it is a really harrowing critique of this whole ideology. And so, yeah, I feel like I'm really thrilled by the work that's happening now to kind of imagine like futures that are worth living in.
Futures that are worth living in, right? That's something I really want to stay with. That's what we're trying to think about. What are you know, at the base level, what are ethically non-reprehensible ways of going into space at the bare minimum, to the other edge of what are futures that we would want to live in, right? What are these different forms and structures that we can invent in which we would want to live? And I want to come back to something that Malka said, which was the absence of joy in a lot of science fiction, right? And so just that moment of the children dancing on the moon it almost brought tears to my eyes, like genuinely. Like when I first read it, it's beautiful. And I want to see visions of space like that. I want to see us imagining ways in which we can thrive. And the thing is, we might never even encounter other life forms, other civilizations, but even if it's just us in a stasis pod going to other galaxies or just going to other parts of this galaxy, we're gonna have to like learn to live with each other, and we can, and like in joyful, nourishing ways, and we can't do that right now on this planet. So it just kind of like reinforces what all of y'all are trying to do here, of course, through the medium of science fiction, but we're trying to think about better ways to exist together here on Earth, and if and when we leave the planet, right? So if two of the three space barons are these Silicon Valley corporate megalords, Silicon Valley hasn't been able to fix things on Earth. Capitalism, racism, environmental destruction rages on at an ever faster speed. So are there, who else can we entrust our futures to, if not these people?
I feel like the answer to that is like, I don't know, it's the same answer I have to like, who can we entrust our future on Earth, right? And it's like to us, to each other, to like communities, like to new, less hierarchical ways of political organization.
Yes, we don't live in a void, as I said before, but there's no such thing as a hero, as a single hero. We do things together all the time, the entire time. Take the COVID-19 situation. Every time the media says, "Oh, the doctors are the real heroes." Okay, in a certain context, they are, but you don't have, as you had on the old old short science fiction stories of yore, a single doctor. Oh, I uncovered the secrets. No, now I can save the human race. There's no such thing. We do it together, or we won't do it at all. And right now, maybe we won't do it at all, because negationists, denialists, etc., but everything. And I think in the space is exactly the same situation. We should battle this. You said, Smaran, now, even if you don't meet anyone else, even there is no aliens, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. But we should learn to love ourselves and to treat ourselves better, because otherwise we are already the aliens of each other here. Everyone is the other. One thing, when we study utopias, we always say, oh, the utopia of one group is the dystopia of another. Omelas, for instance. One's walk away from Omelas. But here's the thing, people, it will be the same thing in space if we don't change things straight. But people don't want to hear the words revolution, for instance. They will see, oh, communism. And what's necessarily wrong with communism? We are always relating it to Stalin. Stalin's dead. Let's see Vietnam right now. Vietnam is doing a good job with agrarian reform, with land distribution, for instance. And we should focus more on the collective. But collectivization is other child of Stalin's time, and the corporations, the huge corporations, don't want you to talk about this. They want you to follow in the footsteps of who? Of Jeff Bezos, or the one who should not be named, of the Tesla Corporation. Nah, fuck them. Sorry, I tend to swear a lot sometimes. Manish is talking about EMM banks. Yes, yes. We should follow on his footsteps.
Actually, one thing I want to say that like really irritates me, right, is that Elon Musk has read the culture novels. He talks about it all the time. He even like named one of
I
his
never
ships.
read.
Yeah, like he clearly missed the point, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask y'all to do an exercise in some of the time that we have left, which is, and it's a really simple exercise, but back to your craft as writers, as people imagining the future, right? And building fictional worlds. Could you place conceivably all of your three pieces in a single world? And what would this new world, because they're all three separate pieces in presumably in sort of different historical time periods or worlds, could you play, so what would this new world be if they could be placed in a world together? And what is this kind of generative conceptual space that comes out of it? Are there any frictions between, say, the Ahimsa Protocol and maybe we could hear more about the research station? Does it belong to a state? Does it belong to a corporation? And then to Manish's world, how do these research stations land up on Europa, on Earth's moon, and on other parts of our solar system? So just as some examples of places in which your pieces overlap and come into possible tension with each other.
I think they work pretty well together. And I think we did have that, the sort of background world building that we were given. Although we all went in somewhat different ways, and I can see them being at different points. I mean, Manish's is kind of historically situated a little bit further along and looking back to what comes out of the experience on the moon base, which I thought was a really nice, interesting perspective. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think we could feed these in along with some of the other artifacts that have been created in this world building to think about the way that, this future could proceed with care and with joy and with these kinds of connections and communities.
Yes, I totally agree with Malka. I think that I didn't plan for it at least in the first moments, for it at any particular point in the chronology. But I think it should be done a bit early in the moon colonization, so a particular group could feel threatened by the way things are apparently staying the same as they were on Earth, and they try to take some preemptive steps for that thing, so that can't happen. But I really would like to expand this story, because I think it wouldn't be not easy at all to do this. And I meant what I said, that I would, when I told Manish that I would like to write a story, maybe about them in the beginning, before the Ahimsa Protocol, how we were going to do this thing while eating. They are eating, they are having coffee, lunch, dinner, and talking all the time. How the fuck we are going to do this? How are we going to puzzle, pick the pieces of the puzzle? And that's and that will be the most utopian thing I can think of right now. People eating together and not wanting to kill each other. People in a family, maybe in a found family, not in your natural family, so to speak. And we could do this really awesomely in a research station. I think it's I think it would be an awesome place to start. And I really do think that the pieces go quite well because of the prompt. I think it was a really good prompt and a really good chronology that we were given to work with.
Yeah, I agree for sure. And I definitely, I guess I was in trying to assemble like a unified timeline in my head. And I really appreciate what Fabio was saying about like the Ahimsa protocols as like an intervention that had to happen on Mare Nectaris. So yeah, I guess I sort of see like, you know, the Ahimsa protocols developed at a similar time um, to when Malka's story takes place, and then kind of shaping the way that the habitation of the outer solar system happens in my story. And something that I guess I haven't resolved for myself yet. And I think the core question is like what sort of uh, travel propulsive system is used to get people to the moons of Jupiter, and whether there's the possibility of return. Because I think if there's no possibility of return, then presumably the premise of like, we're not settling, this is a temporary habitat, I think that premise naturally will come into question. And I think then like the thorny issues, philosophical issues become raised of like, do we have the right to like settle this planet? If we're trying to no longer be a colonizing force, what does that look like? Something that I'm quite interested in as a writer is the notion of like, if we abandon the concept of terraforming, if we say like, okay, terraforming is a kind of manifest destiny that we think that we can shape every world in the galaxy to like human standards, like if we reject that and we say instead, okay, if we are going to go live on another planet, then we need to like bioengineer ourselves to be like good guests on that planet. I think that's just kind of a thing that I've been sitting with. I don't really have more than that, but to me, that seems like perhaps a more respectful way to approach, I don't know, post-planetary civilization.
Something that you just said, Manish, brings to mind. So what you said about terraforming again brings to mind aspects of the history of colonialism. Because if you think about it, when Europeans landed in the Americas and landed in Australia, in a very real way, they did terraform these continents. So the spread of invasive species, of plants, of insects, of diseases, right, devastated both human beings and natural life in these places. And we continue to deal with now through globalization, capitalist globalization, invasive species in different parts of the world. So I feel like once again, we need to learn from our history as we, set forth into this kind of new episode of human existence. And it's precisely at this point that I want to bring up maybe a couple of points that Grace Dillon might have addressed if she was able to make it today, which is what is it that science fiction authors and that like humanity as a whole can learn from indigenous epistemologies and the indigenous experience of dispossession and of the last half millennium as we move into the future. And I think there are real lessons to be learned both from like indigenous politics and epistemologies, for us as a species, as we imagine space, which is what you are all doing, but then also as we possibly begin to start venturing out into space and building habitations in space. We don't just want to keep repeating history, and I think this is something that really merits the kind of centering of what Dillon calls indigenous futurism and indigenous history, politics, epistemologies in general. So maybe I'd like to bring us to a conclusion. Maybe I'd come to all three of you for some final thoughts. Just to conclude, how do you imagine your future writing? So if you expand these pieces or you do, future pieces on this theme, can or will, or you might want to address non-dominating, non-colonial, and egalitarian visions of space. So thinking to your future work, your future creative production.
When I wrote the Ahimsa Protocol, that was pretty much because for the past few years, I've been writing with that on mind. Even my classes, I taught my students until last year. I was teaching them, giving them this challenge. How can you write? I was teaching them script writing for games, and I was challenging them. How can you write a non-violent game? How can you use, avoid totally weapons, avoid shooters? How can you do a fun game without resorting to violence? And we had some really interesting answers to that, but almost all of them eventually resorted to one or two bits of violence. But even so, it was a very good starting point of conversation. It's not simple, but I really believe violence is not innate to human beings. I'm not condoning by any means whatsoever the thought of Steven Pinker, for instance. But I hated that the story is the better side of our angels or something like that. And he wrote about, oh, we are not necessarily violent because there's no violence happening in the world right now like it happened a century ago, which is a bold lie. But I do think we can be better. But capitalism is the ultimate violence. When you are too tired to think of something, which you need to provide for you and your family, you can't think of education, can't think of health. You can only consume. There was really interesting. I was on my way to the veterinary this afternoon here in Rome, and I saw a graffiti. They are very political graffitis here in Rome, and one of them was "Prodotta, consuma, crepa." Produce, consume, die. This is all over Rome, and there it is. Capitalism wants you to do this. Don't pick up a fight. Produce for us, consume and die. Okay, and that's also violence, and we should start addressing this right now. We were talking about terraforming Earth. Exactly what happened. And when they started a centuries-long process of domination, whose apex is right now, and human race is pretty much dying because of it. First, I would like to address this right now in my fiction, not exactly realistically, but I'm still writing space opera, but with a very realistic setting of propositions in mind. I really want to try to think these things, even knowing that they probably won't come to pass, but people who read my stories, maybe they can start another conversation.
What you said, Fabio, about produce, consume, die as the violence of capitalism, of life within capitalism, reminds me, just to bring up another science fiction film, of the movie They Live, right? Where the character puts on these sunglasses that he finds, and he gets to see the sort of true images of society. And like the billboards literally say this: produce, consume, reproduce. And I think in imagining different futures and choosing to live differently, we also need to be we also need to be perceptive of the images that are constantly fed us at the moment in the current society, which might influence the way in which we imagine the future, right? And so the more perceptive we are of the ways that we're told to live under this system at this time, might make it easier for us to imagine, more sustainable and egalitarian futures as we go forward. But Malka and Manish, I'd love to hear from you about your future work and whether these pieces could expand into broader work.
So I have a novella that's coming out in a year and some months, early in 2023, which is astonishing. But publishing time is not real time. And it's set in a human settlement on a gas giant after Earth has become uninhabitable. And also the first attempted settlement off-world has become uninhabitable because people didn't do a good job. And so the story is a mystery and involves a lot of other things going on. The real sort of thematic tension in it, I think, has to do with a sort of a combination of the longing for the way things were and the ability to adapt into something new. And then the further question beyond that of, if we can adapt into something new, can we intentionally change the way that we relate to each other into different environments, so that when we adapt into a new environment, we don't fall into that same pattern of exploitation. There's a scene where they're at an abandoned gas compression plant factory, which was an idea that people arrived on this gas giant and thought, well, we're going to figure out a way to fix Earth really quickly. We might as well look at how we can take some of the fuel from this ginormous gas giant planet and compress it so we can take it back with us when we go to Earth. So we'll have all this fuel that's just lying around here, energy. That's what we needed before. And it's been abandoned because they could not fix Earth so quickly. And the focus shifted away from this sort of exploitation on the same terms as what happened on Earth. But it has shifted in some ways to other kinds of exploitation and other kinds of hierarchies. And so, I'm now actually kind of in the early stages of thinking about a sequel that might continue to expand on that. I think that it's a really useful way, because I think, as we are presenting different futures, we also need to reflect what's going on today, and we need to reflect these problems and dangers, but we need to do it in such a way that people can hear it, which the people who might not hear it if it's said directly to them that there's a problem, or who might not find it interesting to read a white paper about such and such, or to think about these things. But if we can tell a fun story that is set with a gap, a shift in time or place or person or mood, so that the understanding of this analogy comes later on, then I think it can be really useful in giving people a reflection of what's happening. So I am thinking along those lines quite a bit. In terms of what I wrote for this, I don't know, it's working from a prompt that was given to us. So I don't know how much more collaborative world building will be happening in this place that's been built, but I would certainly be happy to write more in it if that's something that's going on, because I did think it was a wonderful idea. There's been some collaborative work already put into it so far. And I enjoyed very much writing the little piece for this. So I would certainly be happy to continue with that and write more about this station on Mare Nectaris and what it's like to live in a place that has been designed for families and communities to exist in a way that feels like living and not just enduring. So yes and yes.
Wow, both of your upcoming work sounds amazing. I'm really, really looking forward to checking it out, especially after being in conversation with both of you. So I guess as far as expanding, what I'd written for this, definitely sort of at least interested in exploring those questions, especially questions of like, what does it mean to go forth into space in a way that is ethical. And I think that's definitely a seed that has been planted in my mind by this exercise and this conversation. As far as work that I've been working on goes, so earlier I talked about terraforming and like, you know, this idea of like terraforming every planet and moon in the solar in the galaxy to human specifications. So this is actually the ideology of a fallen galactic empire in the novel I'm working on, where they actually have this like manifest destiny on steroids idea. Like we are going to change every single like orbital body to be something that humans can inhabit. And you know, they're extremely exploitative. They like bioengineer workers for these worlds. In many cases, the workers are then like exterminated once the planet is like terraformed, and it's horrific. It's like a horrible galactic empire. The galactic empire collapses, and the novel is set like, you know, in at the end days of like 1,000-year period of collapse and the long undeath of this empire. And one of the things that I think I've been trying to challenge myself on, sort of a blind spot that I noticed, was how easy it is to fall back into the received patterns from the genre. So for example, oh, all future history is like space capitalism or space empire. And it was like, wow, why am I replicating this? And, you know, I think obviously those stories still have pull. And I think, you know, I'm still drawn to fiction about space empire. I'm like writing a whole book about it. And I think people still want to read that stuff, but I think it's really, really important that the critique be folded in. And the critique is there, but I think maybe even more important, and this is what I'm trying to work on now, is presenting an alternative within the text itself. Been reading a lot of David Graeber's work and reading a book by James Scott, where he talks about how in the historical record, sort of big settled societies are dominant in the historical record because they were the ones who like built these big stone cities and left records. But actually there's like lots of evidence of, you know, based non-settled societies or different types of settled societies that are not necessarily these like hierarchical violent societies. And so I really love the idea of, as I'm writing this book, just being like, okay, no, in the far future history of like humans spreading across the galaxy, there are actually tons of different societal and political models that were developed that may not have like may have been like destroyed by empires, or may have just like not, you know, been the dominant form, but like these experiments definitely existed, and they're definitely important. Modes of resistance always exist to these structures of violence, and I think it's really important to, at the same time that I'm like critiquing empire, also show like there are alternatives that are actually things that would be much more worth living in than systems of domination.
Are some of the most sustainable and the most egalitarian societies those that left the least amount of environmental waste and remains for archaeologists to find? Like, I mean, that's a provocation I'd love to think about. But you mentioned, Manish, David Graeber and David Wengrow's new book, The Dawn of Everything. And one of the major figures they discuss in that book, there's a lovely Democracy Now! Special about it that came out yesterday, where they interviewed David Wengrow. One of the major figures is Kondiaronk, you know, who was an indigenous intellectual who David Graeber and Wengrow argue influenced European Enlightenment ideas, might have even, you know, sparked the formation of European Enlightenment ideas of democracy and equality. So I really want to stay on that impulse as we wrap up, which is that, you know, sort of thinking forms of community from the global South and from indigenous nations and communities is something that we should like really center as we go forward in thinking about futures in space. And I think all three of your pieces have shown so wonderfully how, like, what that can be, right? What really beautiful, strong hints of that can be. I want to taste the plankton on Europa mixed with saffron, right? I want to see the children bouncing up and down on the moon as they communicate with their grandparents on Earth. And I want to imagine, forms of nonviolent life, both on Earth and in outer space. So with that, I want everyone here to thank our wonderful writers and panelists, Fabio Fernandez, Malka Older, and Manish Melwani. And I know Manish has a novella coming out soon, but since the only physical objects right now I have are from Malka and Fabio, I'm gonna hold them up and I want you to go check them out.
Just a quick plug, if I may. I have another collection a few months ago, Love and Archaeology, by Lunar Press Publishing from the UK, from Scotland.
Wonderful. So thank you all, and thank you also to Colin and Jose, and to the Venice Biennale. This has been fantastic, and I hope we have events like this in the future as well. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Huge round of applause.
Thank you.
so
It was
much.
a pleasure. Thank you.